Okay, so now let's update our IIS server to serve the JSON files we want. This is a little more difficult than with Node, but it's not too difficult. In order to do this, we're going to open up Visual Studio and create a new Web API project. And we're going to put that right here. This is the root directory where we've been working in with our application. And we'll call this application app data. And we're just going to create a new MVC application, and we'll use the Web API template. So let's just rename this default controller that they created, and we'll call it event controller. Okay, so now let's create our get method, and this is the method that we'll use to retrieve our events. So our method is going to return a JToken, which will help us return the appropriate JSON response, and it's going to take in an optional ID parameter. Then we're just going to use that ID to build our file name and read the file from disk and return it using JObject. And again, that JObject.parse just helps us make sure we're returning a valid JSON response. That isn't usually necessary with Web API because typically we're just returning the actual classes that we're working with. An API just transforms those classes into JSON for us. But this is necessary because we're just returning a string that is already in JSON format that we loaded off of disk. So just to see what we're actually returning, let me show you that we already have these JSON files here on disk. So 1.json, 2.json, etc. are the files that we're loading based on the ID. And this is what the file looks like. You should have this file available if you have the exercise files, and if not, it's in the demo app.zip file in the GitHub repo. I'd just recommend pulling it in from one of those places rather than trying to type all of this in. Just make sure that you put them in the same directory structure. So again, you can type all of this in if you wish, but I'd recommend that you pull it from one of those two locations, and then just make sure you put it in this directory. Alright, now that we have our get method, let's also write our post method that we'll use for saving our events later. Okay, one last edit. We're just going to want to edit the default route in the Web API config to get rid of this API slash so we don't have to use it in our URLs. Okay, so let's build this. And then we need to go over to IIS and create the application in our website that points to this. You can see here that we already have our data directory here, which is where all our JSON files are. And we're basically going to mount our new Web API application over that same location. But we're going to leave that directory there for those that are following along in the Node server. This is just fine. IIS will just leave that directory in place, even if we create a new application with the same name. So let's just right-click on our website and choose Add Application, and we'll name it Data. And then if you don't have an ASP.NET 4.0 application pool, you're going to want to create one over here in Application Pools. Just make sure that when you do that, that you choose the 4.0 .NET framework. Okay, so we're just going to use this one, and then we're going to go point that to a new App Data Web API application. And we created that right here. Okay. So we now have that application mounted here, and we've built our application. So let's go over to our browser and check that out. Okay, there, now I've refreshed. You can see that we have all of our application data here, and that's pulling from our server. And again, just as a reminder, that's being set here from our event controller, and we're fetching that from our event data service using the HTTP service. And now we have that working in a Web API application on the back end.